We come on the air amid a tsunami of Trump-manufactured crises and extreme conduct. We'll get to all of that for you. But our top story is the one driving Donald Trump's approval ratings down to new depths by the day. It's the prospect of empty store shelves and rising prices on all sorts of goods nationwide. NBC News reporting this, quote, retailers are warning that U.S. consumers could once again be faced with empty store shelves and the kind of supply chain snarls that mark the COVID era if Donald Trump's tariffs on China remain at their current levels. Companies have been canceling their shipments of goods from China and halting new orders. Some of the products likeliest to go missing from store shelves in the coming months will be lower-cost footwear, apparel, toys, and electronics, for which manufacturing is heavily concentrated in China. And what will be on the store shelves will likely come in at a higher cost. Prices are already rising. CNBC reports this, quote, Amazon merchants are hiking prices for everything from diaper bags and refrigerator magnets to charm necklaces and other top-selling items as they confront higher import costs. E-commerce software company Smart Scout tracked 930 products on Amazon that have seen increased prices since April 9th. With an average jump of 29%. 6 months after a presidential election that was defined by deep voter frustration over the price of everything, there are headlines like this one in the New York Times today. Quote, a sign that consumers are anxious. They're cutting back on snacks. New York Times reports this, quote, consumers worried about the economy are pulling back on their spending. And that anxiety is translating into lower sales and profits for some of the country's largest consumer-oriented companies. In fact, we've seen a steady drumbeat of warnings from the business community in the last couple weeks.
America's CEOs are sounding the alarm, warning that the U.S. economy could soon take a big hit after President Trump's sweeping tariff announcement sent markets spinning.
Rick, Liberation Day was just a few weeks ago, earlier this month. How have things felt with you and your business since you learned how high these tariffs were going to be?
I'm rapidly being liberated from my money. So not so great, Becky.
There will likely be pricing. Tariffs are inherently inflationary.
I think we've lost a whole year of earnings growth because the policies have already happened.
Now, the economic picture is becoming a defining political crisis for Donald Trump. He rode a wave of post-COVID anxiety and frustration with rising prices into the White House for a second time. And day in and day out on the campaign trail, he promised to lower prices like this.
From today and from the day I take the oath of office, we will rapidly drive prices down and make America affordable again.
Literally the opposite has come to pass, but not because of a pandemic, because of him. And now that he's in office, Trump, again, can't blame anybody else. He did this. He started the trade war. He imposed a 145% tariff on China, one of our biggest trading partners. And now Trump faces headline after live shot about stressed business owners, stressed out and angry consumers, and even some of his closest allies on Wall Street are publicly sounding the alarm. So now he's desperately trying to create the impression that everything's under control, he's in charge, and that trade war is winding down. Trump telling Time magazine in an interview that the president of China gave him a call. And when he was asked what President Xi said, he said this. We're going to have to quote it and read it to you in its entirety. Quote, if people want to, well, we all want to make deals. But I am this giant store. It's a giant, beautiful store, and everybody wants to go shopping there. And on behalf of the American people, I own the store, and I set prices, and I'll say, if you want to shop here, this is what you have to pay, end quote. Not exactly inspiring, not even an answer to the question. Today, the Chinese government once again denied that any talks have taken place. A spokesperson saying, quote, China and the U.S. have not held consultations or negotiations on the issue of tariffs. The United States should not confuse the public, end quote. The Trump administration flailing about with no end in sight to Donald Trump's trade war with China. is where we start today. U.S. financial commentator for the Financial Times and writer of the Unhedged newsletter, Robert Armstrong, is back with us. Also joining us, host of the Bulwark podcast, MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller is here. Your line about an old man in a hurry stuck with me all night. So we had a request in for your reappearance today, and I really want you to explain to me where the breakdown is in anyone sort of nodding and going along with Trump starting a trade war with the economy in the healthy position it was in. Why couldn't that have been averted by just his allies in the business world before it started?
Trump is a hard man to convince. And although he's very flexible and very responsive to the market and to popularity, this is an issue where he's been a true believer for 40 years. Tariffs. The power of tariffs, and even beyond tariffs, the basic idea that America is being treated unfairly, not only by its enemies, but by its friends. So you have a kind of ideological purism at the center of Trump's political philosophy here. And like all ideological purism, it's turning out to be quite dangerous. And what in particular, I think, has led the administration astray is the view that tariffs achieve all goals. So there might be any number of good reasons or bad reasons you might want to have a tariff. You might want to bring jobs back to the United States. You might want to generate revenue. You might want to protect national security. You might want to rebuild a manufacturing base. But for all of those goals, you would have different tariffs aimed different places and set in different ways and negotiated in different ways. But what Trump basically said in the run-up to Liberation Day was, we're going to have all of those things and a pony, and we're going to be richer, and it's going to happen really quickly. Look, the world trading system took 50 years to turn into the beast that it is now. It's not going to be changed in 2 years, let alone 2 weeks. So it is a case of massively overpromising on the part of Trump and the Trump administration.
It feels like the business community and the markets are meeting the real Trump for the first time. What is the difference in how they view him this time from last time?
I mean, I think there is a realization, as we talked a little bit about yesterday, that the second Trump term is not the first Trump term. This is a president who feels like he was slighted the first time around, maybe misused some of his opportunities, and he's more determined to push the core of his agenda now. And I think what people are realizing is that this core agenda about tariffs involves shocks to the economy. It's not like a tax cut. This is a tax increase, and it's going to be visible, and like any tax increase, it's going to be painful, and there's going to be consequences. And it's like, it's really happening.
Yeah, but that's it. But that's a tariff, perfectly executed. There's nothing that he's done that he's executed well. So it's a tariff without a public formula rooted in anything, executed by people they like, but he doesn't listen to, and they fear, and they seem to have their hands on the wheel.
And no warning. This is the important thing. Anytime you're going to make if you want a major piece of economic policy to go smoothly, you telegraph it. You don't, it's not shock therapy. Maybe you use, a shock may be useful in a negotiation. It's not useful in economic policy making because people need time to adjust. Another point is Trump seems to have lost track of the difference between a tariff and an embargo. If you put a 10 or a 20% levy on Chinese goods, that's a tariff.
But do you think he knows the difference?
Well, I think, if 145 is 145%, that's an embargo. That's the number of profits that can be profitably, the number of products rather that can be profitably sold in the United States with an 145% tariff coming from China. It's very small. You're just turning it off. Now, I'm sure Trump assumed that negotiations would bring those tariffs down. I mean, I think he had a vision of the rest of the world crawling to the White House on its knees. But what we've learned in the last week or so is that's really not happening. All along, real experts, people with real expertise in the trade area have said trade negotiations take a long time. The devil's in the details. It's hard work. And this team seems to have assumed that these issues could be resolved overnight. I mean, it's absolutely crazy.
Who in the business community sort of has the best back channel to him, if those are even being used? I mean, who still thinks of themselves as someone who can talk sense into him?
I don't know. I wish I had the answer to that question. I think even in the first Trump administration, someone like Jamie Dimon had an easy time getting through to the White House and other bank CEOs. I think, Trump likes the big names and listens to the big names. He's a TV guy. But I honestly don't know if those calls are getting through at this point. I'd like to know, but I honestly don't.
This is, therefore, the final Friday until President Trump hits that big 100-day marker. He's ending another very rough week, and a lot of the ingredients that made it so rough, chaotic, and even hellish for the Trump administration were largely of Trump's own making.
President Trump marks 100 days in office next week, but new polling shows voters see little to celebrate.
Americans are not buying what Donald Trump is selling them.
The polls, they're not extraordinary.
He is underwater when it comes to the economy, tariffs, and inflation.
It's been one of the worst Aprils since the Great Depression and the most volatile April since the global financial crisis.
We saw the markets tanking and blinked.
There were a rough couple of days there in the courtroom for the Trump administration.
Well, once again today, Donald Trump backed down. Once again today, the man who always pretends he never backs down, never backed down big time.
That is true, as our friend and colleague Lawrence O'Donnell puts it there. And you'll notice in that brief summary I just showed you how this week is playing, we included coverage and reaction from folks across different networks. This is not one of those things that splits into America's sometimes divided perspectives of what do you consume and what do you think and what do you watch? Are you going with your prior convictions, as they say? Nope, this is another week that actually, in reality, exposes the gap between Trump's talk, which, of course, is part of his thing. He knows how to talk. He knows how to command a room. That's what made him a working reality TV host, and at times it made him effective at the campaigning part of politics, right? But unlike reality shows, this week's actual reality proves the gap between talk and action. The stock market continues to slide and move around, but ultimately be down about 9%, multiple trillions of dollars down because of Trump's tariff policy. White House has been trying to stem the bleeding, not by saying, hey, you're going to get more of what you got in the last 95 days. Quite the opposite. A lot of White House aides are saying, we promise this is going to end soon. We're going to back down. Donald Trump's going to do less of whatever it is he's been doing on tariffs. Trump's also underwater in the public polling, and that's across multiple surveys. Pew, Reuters, Fox News, as we told you, there he is, underwater by 11 points. It's a steep and sudden slide from the bravado of Donald Trump's November win. Remember, he was crowing then about overcoming his past problems, which politically he did. I mean, he got more votes. But the problems were also, remember, of his own making. He provided enough criminal evidence to get himself indicted in 4 different cases, something that had never happened to any former president a single time. High bar to do that. Now, he was legally presumed innocent. I told you that at the time, but he still provided that much evidence. And that usually is a negative. And he overcame that politically. So the headlines were blaring, you might remember, about his comeback and how it's Trump's America. And that, as you see, is the New York Times. It signals a different kind of country, we were told. That was just a couple months ago, y'all. Well, what a difference about 100 days makes. Trump is on defense now. Elon Musk is chastened, openly talking about pulling back from his D.C. job duties. And now, today, I can tell you, an ancient phrase is circulating in Washington. You might know it from the classic 1958 novel, Things Fall Apart. Shout out Chinua Achebe. You might know it from the Roots album, which quoted that same novel, Things Fall Apart. It's a phrase that refers basically to circumstances that can seem permanent, that are even believed collectively to last forever, that we share as like this is reality, that people take as kind of the framework of life, and then those things can just fall apart. So you kind of know the meaning already, even if I did the newscaster thing of maybe over-explaining it. You know what it means when things are a certain way and we're told they're going to be that way, and then the things fall apart. And while Trump has benefited from people buying into his PR, the spectacle, the show, and people do think he and Elon Musk and this whole political thing was big and resilient, the Washington Post, taking stock of another Trump Hell Week, is asking, cue the phrase, are things falling apart for Trump? The question's more than fair. Today, right here, you can see the president departing for the Pope's funeral. That may offer him a break from some of the chaos that he's been reckoning with. If he's traveling over there for the funeral, he won't be available to do another in-person meeting soon, with CEOs warning about empty shelves coming to America from Trump's trade war, as he had to do earlier this week. And that news spilled out. It was bad headlines, we can tell you that. He won't be around this weekend as more signals and stories show that Elon Musk's loud, quick start is really melting into a also quick retreat. Both men, Trump and Musk, say that Elon Musk's duties will continue to shrink. And this comes after Trump already narrowed Musk's role after that cabinet clash meeting. You might recall that was one of the many big stories of the first 100 days. This week, Musk tried and failed. He was stopped from installing a loyalist inside the Treasury Department. A kind of bureaucratic sign that on one hand is small, I would even argue boring, right? It's just one little thing and one little agency, and yet it also says something that's important based on the boring evidence. And I will tell it to you simply. Those Musk tactics, which did partially work, say, in February, storming into the agencies, fire first, scare people, send them nasty emails, see who'll quit, litigating after, some of those tactics worked in the short run in the sense that they got part of where he wanted to go, because he got rid of some people or he caused the fights he wanted and went forward on his efforts to cut staff and money out of parts of the federal government. So they were kind of working. Well, now they're not working, which is why that boring agency story detail matters, because Elon Musk, with all of his money and power, storming into the cabinet meetings, his relationship with the president, he says, I want this one fellow at IRS. And they go, no, Elon. And he lost. And this also touches on the economic realm, where these other Trump power players have the president's ear, because the president's worried about losing billions or trillions more in the markets. And for Trump, that's certainly a political problem, makes him look bad. It's also supposed to be a governing problem if he cares about people's well-being in the country. But for Elon Musk, it's actually something much more deeply personal. Because it's not just costing Elon Musk millions that the Trump trade war and other problems are dragging down the economy. It's not just costing Elon Musk $1 billion or even billions, plural. You hear about a lot of billionaires. Well, most billionaires that we report on and mention, they don't have $10 billion, let alone 50, right? Let me tell you this fact as we end the rough week, approaching 100 days. Elon Musk has now lost a staggering $122 billion because Musk's wealth is tied up in Tesla, which has been hammered for a bunch of reasons, along with the other companies that are crashing, and its net income plunged more than half, plunged 70%. There's also evidence Musk never thought it would get this bad for him or cost him this much. He's leaving not only with his reputation wounded, Axios now reports at the end of this tough week, but relationships severed, company in crisis, fortune diminished. Now, as the richest person, Musk has lost more money than most. And we can also ask, again, as a society, in terms of tax policy and how we might write the rules, whether we think anyone should have $10 or $100 billion or $200 billion when other people don't have health care and kids still go hungry in our country. That's, I guess, a story for a whole nother night. But yes, Musk lost more because he has so much more. But he's not the only one. The tech CEOs who thought they could improve their fortunes, quite literally, by linking to Trump are finding it was all a bad bet in these first 100 days. Zuckerberg is out over 20B. Bezos, a one-time Trump critic, owns the Washington Post and all that. He went towards Trump. He made his deal. He's out over 30B. If they wanted return on investment, they're getting instead losses on losses. And as they tell you in some songs, losses are L's. And you either take them and learn from them, you turn the loss into a lesson, or you risk taking more L's. Some food for thought on this Friday. Now, Some of that bluster I mentioned is melting into leaks. Trump allies are turning on each other. You can see headlines here across several different outlets finding a similar story. The veneer of discipline falling away, the amateurs having a hard time of it. Then there's this grifting. And those large stories that I just walked through are sometimes overshadowing these other ones. The grift is continuing on the financial side. Trump's crypto team is now offering publicly, they're not hiding this, that people who put millions into his crypto, meaning he will get a whole chunk of that, probably the majority, although they haven't been very transparent, but people who basically pay him can then go to the White House and have dinner with him. This puts the old Clinton-Lincoln bedroom scandals to shame. The scheme was announced during the tough week, during this website, have dinner with President Trump. There's an AI sort of edited image of him there. Crypto investors have bought up to, and these numbers are really striking, but over $100 million. Reading from this Post story, this was on the front page of the Washington Post, 27 what they call wallets, with more than $8 million in these crypto Trump coins worth about $100 million. This has boosted the value of Trump's crypto assets himself. They estimate it there. And it's blatantly unethical because you are putting money in a pot to get access to the White House, which is a government building and government activities that you, the taxpayers, support, and access to the president. They admit it. They say you'll get to meet with the president. That is what would be allegedly one half of what could constitute an illegal bribe. Bribery, by the way, not only a felony that can land people in prison, including the forthcoming former Democratic Senator Bob Menendez and others, but bribery also is an impeachable offense. Because if you're a judge or a senator or a president and you commit bribery, well, then you can't be trusted to do the job, and it's actually something that you can be removed for, even if you're never convicted of a crime. Now, to be clear, I said allegedly half. The other half is you'd have to commit to a favor in exchange for money. The Post story has this half, them basically funneling money, not to the president's campaign coffers or a PAC, but to him through the meme coins. But they don't have any reports of, to be fair, the favor. You just have to ask yourself, why would people, including potentially foreign business people, want to give away not, $100 for a photograph, but millions of dollars unless they did expect something in return? So here we are. No modern president has had an opening 100 days like this. And the big, blustery claims from Donald Trump and Elon Musk themselves that this was going to be great and the markets were going to go up and the prices were going to go down, those claims, or even, as I showed, the headlines that don't age well, like the New York Times telling us all, hey, you live in Trump's America now because he had a great comeback and everybody likes him. All of that has fallen apart in 100 days.
We begin with NBC's senior national security correspondent, Courtney Kube, Reuters White House correspondent, Jeff Mason, and former RNC communications director, John Hai. So, Courtney, help us understand about the, help us understand about this so-called dirty line. What is it?
Yeah, so this is an unsecure, as you mentioned, communication line that really defies the general security protocol for an internet or for an outside communication line here in the Pentagon. Now, most of the offices here you're not allowed to bring your phone, no AirPods, no Apple Watches, nothing like this. But then there are also a number of them that are considered a SCIF. That's a secure, compartmentalized area. What we have now learned, and this really came from originally from fantastic reporting out of our colleagues at the Associated Press, is that, in fact, the secretary defied those normal protocols for securing information here in the Pentagon and insisted that he have one of these, quote, dirty lines or an outside insecure line installed in his office. Now, his office is one of those secure, compartmentalized, or generally known as a SCIF. It is one of those, so it would not generally be allowed in there. Now, this just follows a string of incidents that we are learning about and have learned about over the last several weeks about the secretary, in which he appears to have a lack of respect or acknowledgement for some of the basic security protocols that exist, or when you're the head of the Pentagon and you have access to so much sensitive information. Of course, we learned earlier this week that not only was there the signal chat that was created by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz last month, that Secretary Hegseth included sensitive and imminent military information, operations that were about to unfold with the Houthis in Yemen, but we also learned earlier this week that, in fact, He also, the secretary, started his own Signal chat and included family members on it, including his wife, his brother, his personal attorney, and other close aides, and also shared military information on that chat. Of course, his wife is not an employee of the Department of Defense. His brother is, but really would have no reason to need to know anything about military operations against the Houthis. And Jose, just to add to that, we also learned, in fact, the information that he was sharing on these Signal chats, this is an unclassified commercial app. That information came directly, in some cases word for word, from the commanding general of U.S. Central Command, General Eric Kurilla. General Kurilla sent that to the secretary on a classified system, Jose.
And what more are you learning about the secretary's behavior?
Yeah, and so amidst all of these scandals and what has really been a constant drumbeat of reporting about the secretary's judgment, some of the things that he's been doing, the secretary has become increasingly erratic, according to a number of officials who we spoke with. He seems more and more insecure about his role in the administration, officials saying that he is increasingly prioritizing things about his image, going on Fox News, so that where he thinks he can directly speak to the president, to President Trump, and he can show him he's still a fighter. But you mentioned one of the most notable cases here, and that was several weeks ago when the New York Times was about to report that they had learned about this classified Elon Musk briefing on China that was to occur here. When the secretary found out that a reporter had uncovered this imminent briefing, he lashed out at the acting chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Chris Grady, telling him that he would expletive polygraph him if he found out that he was a leaker, and that he and his staff also threatened to polygraph other senior officials here, as you mentioned, 3- and 4-star generals and admirals who had not only access to the meeting, but the agenda for that meeting. Jose, this is the kind of behavior, look, maybe it happens behind the scenes more often than we realize, but it's not the kind of behavior we're used to hearing from the Secretary of Defense, specifically when dealing with his most senior military advisors and aides.
Yeah, I mein, Jeff, what is the relationship between the president and Hegseth? The vice president and the president have, until right now, been very strong in their support for Hegseth. Is that also in private?
Well, I think you're right to emphasize that. They've been very strong in terms of what they've said about Hegseth in public. The press secretary has come out from the podium and said that the president supports him. He also picked him for a reason. He likes the guy. And some of these issues were flagged in terms of Hegseth's inexperience running a big department like this, and some other administrative issues, not to mention some of his other personal issues, were all part of his nomination process. And those were things that President Trump was willing to tolerate. If you look, though, at his history of dealing with other aides in his first administration and other top cabinet officials, his patience doesn't last forever. So, not forecasting anything, but I do understand why a defense secretary in his position would want to be appealing to the president by going on Fox News right now.
Now, patience may not last forever, but one questions what happens when his patience run out. What does he do or not do?
Yeah, well, that's the question that I don't have an answer to. It'll depend on how this continues to develop, and it will depend on whether President Trump himself feels like Hegseth is just getting unfairly treated by the press or by the people around him, or whether he says, all right, enough is enough, this is a distraction from my actual agenda. But I do think it's important to underscore that he likes Hegseth, he chose him for a reason, and he may have even anticipated that there would be some drama around him because there was drama around his nomination.
I want us to also bring in MSNBC military analyst and former deputy commander of the U.S. European Command, Lieutenant General Steph Twitty. General, it's great seeing you. So Courtney was talking about how the secretary's office is a SCIF. If you would tell us about what a SCIF is, and an entire office is a SCIF, so what would being in a SCIF preclude?
Yeah, so appreciate being on your show there, Jose. It is a secret compartmented office where you can take classified information, whether it be secret information or top secret information, inside his office. And it has the security requirements necessary to either talk about classified information or share classified information with folks that are cleared. And oh, by the way, everyone that comes in his office and they're going to talk about classified information, they must be cleared, and there's certain protocols that they must go through before they enter that office, ensuring that they have proper security clearance and so forth. but I had a SCIF as my time as a general officer. My office was used as a SCIF, and there's various protocols that are necessary before folks can even talk about classified information in that office.
Doug, from a communications perspective to start, how big of a problem is this for the Secretary of Defense and for the Trump administration?
It's a growing problem. And when we look back when this first came out, the response from the White House was the typical fake news, don't believe any of this. And I thought it was a problem because it seemed pretty clear that there was going to be a day 2, a day 3 of this story. Now we're on week 3. Donald Trump doesn't want to deal this anymore. And Jeff's right. Donald Trump likes him. He wants somebody who will be a fighter on TV and so forth. But let's remember, Donald Trump is president in part because of 2 words. You're fired. That's his brand. That's how most voters know him and his core identity. It's who he really is. So at some point, I think the straw breaks for Pete Hegseth here because this story just seems to not go away and there's always something new. If this continues, Donald Trump at some point is going to say those 2 words that we know from him so well.
The question is, controlling the timing, right? And I think that there have been reports that the president doesn't like to consider anything that could look like it is playing into the media's narrative, right? So is it a situation of timing, or is it a situation that if he supports him, he's going to go support him through hell and high water?
Well, let's remember, Donald Trump is somebody who doesn't give points. He only takes them away, one at a time. And so if he's able to find a timing situation, let's say the funeral of a pope or a peace deal with Russia and Ukraine, however that gets defined, Donald Trump may have his opportunity to sort of bury that news. And we know, not predicting anything for today, but in the first Trump administration, about 4 o'clock every Friday, something big happened.
Jeff, one of the things that happened recently, the Secretary of Defense's chief of staff resigned, Joe Casper, but he apparently is being reassigned within the administration. What do we know about that?
I don't have any details on that, but I do think just broadly the fact that there's been so much turnover at the Pentagon in the Secretary of Defense's short tenure is also not a great sign. It's something that it suggests disorganization. It suggests that they're not being able to really execute, is the word I was looking for, on the priorities that the president has set. So again, it's about drama, it's about distractions, and the question is how long the president is willing to tolerate that.
What do you think the perspective is in the Oval Office to all of these different things? Because the reaction, right, to the tariffs, now Hegseth, going on 3 weeks of it. What do you think inside the Oval Office? How are they seeing this?
Well, I think it's true what you were saying before about being backed into a corner and certainly not wanting to play into what the president may perceive as a media narrative. If he feels like he's doing that, then he's going to do the opposite. And I think we've got lots of examples of that in multiple different policy and communications areas. So I'm the last person who's going to sit here and predict what the president of the United States is going to do. But I do think within the Oval Office, they can't be happy about this distraction. I can't imagine that Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, is happy about this distraction. They've got a big 100 days anniversary next week. They want to focus on the things that the president has done, the policy and social society areas that he has upended. That's what they want to focus on. They don't want to focus on dysfunction.
Yeah, Susie Wiles is a well-established pro. She's there to run a tight ship. DOD is not a tight ship, to put it mildly. Everything we see coming out of DOD is bad news, and it all emanates from the secretary's office. That's a problem.
And so, General, that problem, is that something you see that could be solved within the current DOD?
So let me put this in deeper context here, Jose. This is about America's sons and daughters, those that are in harm's way right now. And so as we sit here today, we got service members in harm's way, whether it be in Syria or Iraq, or whether it be in Korea or on the periphery of Russia, supporting our NATO allies. And our sons and daughters, our service members, they need clarity, they need guidance in their mission. They need someone that they know that is going to back them and not put them in harm's way by being up on signal when they're trying to execute classified missions. And they need steady leadership in the Pentagon so none of this stuff percolates down to them and starts impacting them or morale. And so that's what all this is about in my mind.
We have crossed to the top of the hour, 7:02 here in New York, closing in on the first 100 days of President Trump's second term in office. This morning, Time is out with an exclusive interview with the Commander-in-Chief, where the president discusses a range of topics from his administration, following court orders to the future of Ukraine. Joining us now on Morning Joe for the first broadcast discussion of that interview, senior political correspondent at Time, Eric Cortellessa. He was part of the team conducting the interview with President Trump. Also with us, NBC News and MSNBC political analyst, former U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill. Good morning to you both. So, Eric, I'll start with you. You spent about an hour in the room with the president. What was your headline coming out of it?
Well, I think, my main impression was that, the last two times I spoke with President Trump, he was in a very sort of triumphant setting. Either he was on pace to, beat Joe Biden in the election, or he had just won the presidency. In this instance, he's now confronted with the challenges of governing. I think, a couple of big things came out of the interview. For one, I think Donald Trump provided some insight into his view about the tariffs, specifically when, we asked whether or not he would consider it a victory if we still had high tariffs on foreign imports a year from now, as high as, 20%, 30%, 50%. He called it a total victory. So, I think that he's not planning to necessarily back down on the tariffs. He did say that he had spoken with Xi more than once since he announced his tariffs, and that there were talks ongoing between his administration and the Chinese. The Chinese deny that, but the Trump administration says they're embarking on talks and are optimistic for a deal. He said he had 200 deals that were inked at one point, but didn't say when they would be announced. A number of other very newsy items that came out of the interview, but those are just a couple of the main ones.
Yeah, Eric, it's a very all-encompassing interview, and congratulations for pushing back on several things. Clearly, but you just mentioned the deals aspect, that he's made 200 deals already, and you ask him, when are you going to announce them? Well, not time. How did you handle this throughout that entire interview on each and every topic? There was discrepancies between reality and what the president is telling you.
Yeah, just kept asking him as much as I could, what he was doing, what he was going to do. I think, there's a very sort of telling sequence, particularly when we spoke about complying with court orders. President Trump, as I asked him, why he was not facilitating the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, despite the Supreme Court's ruling, his answer was that his lawyers are telling him that that is not what the Supreme Court ruling says. I read for him the ruling. He still disputed it. When I asked whether or not he had asked President Bukele of El Salvador to facilitate his release or to bring him back, he said that he hadn't asked him positively. And so, throughout the interview, I found that Trump was, more evasive, more cantankerous than he has been in the past. Throughout the interview, he's very, gracious at other points as well. But, it was always, involved pushing back as much as he could to try and get an answer from him.
So, Eric, I want to continue on that Abrego Garcia conversation. It stood out to me. It's fascinating. You all asked him, couldn't you just bring him back and try him here if you believe that he's a member of a gang, if you believe that he's committed crimes? And the president said, you could bring him back. That's exactly right. You could fix this simply by bringing him back and going through the legal process. But I leave that decision to the lawyers, which seemed to be an answer throughout this section of your conversation. It's up to my lawyers. It's up to my lawyers. And he says, and they don't want to do that right now. It sort of defies credibility that he could not just call the president of El Salvador and say, we need this guy back. And if we think he's a criminal, we'll put him on trial. They've admitted. They said it was a mistake, an administrative error. But it did sound a little softer than I've heard him before, saying, yeah, I guess we could bring him back and try him, but that's up to my lawyers.
Yeah, I think he really, reverted to that answer over and over again during this sequence of the conversation, that it's up to my lawyers. My lawyers have told me that's not what the ruling says. My lawyers told me I don't have to do that. So I think he was advised at some point to say that anytime he was asked on the subject. And, he was pretty persistent in holding that line.
All right, Claire McCaskill's got a question for you. Claire?
So on a related subject matter, I'm curious, what is your sense about this pending confrontation with the judges writ large? He is losing in court. I think Trump-appointed judges have ruled against him more than 60% of the time, which is a huge mark for Trump-appointed judges ruling against the president. Do you sense that he has the gravity of the situation front of mind, that he is in a position to really put our country in a constitutional crisis that we've never seen before? Or is he just brushing it off and acting as if this is business as usual with a bunch of scallywags on the bench?
Yeah, I didn't get the sense that President Trump thinks we're heading toward a constitutional crisis that he's precipitated. I think he thinks that, the judges are trying to stand in his way from him being able to implement his agenda. Both him and, senior advisors to President Trump, both, they all complained to me in conversations that there were regional judges who were, trying to usurp his authority on foreign policy and that they would fight back as vigorously as possible. So I think, Trump basically sees these judges as a nuisance who are standing in his way for that, standing in his way for him being able to enact the policies that he campaigned on. He says, this is exactly what I said I was going to do during the campaign. I said I was going to deport people. I said I was going to do all the things that I'm doing. And, he's basically saying he's not going to let judges stand in the way. He said, by the way, he did say he would comply with Supreme Court orders, and he said he would comply with lower court orders. Obviously, he has challenged the lower courts. He called for Judge Boasberg to be impeached. And as we've seen from this case involving Kilmar Abrego Garcia, he hasn't moved to try to bring this man back. So, we'll see where it goes from here. But I think Trump basically sees these judges as an impediment. But he doesn't seem all too fazed about the consequences that he thinks may follow.
Eric, was there any sense of frustration on the part of the president? He said he was going to end the war in Ukraine in a day. The war, he didn't do that. He said that he was going to fix the economy just like that. Of course, the economy hadn't been fixed, and in fact, we may be in a recession that he seems to have brought on. Was there any frustration that he hasn't been able to deliver on a lot of the things that he promised?
It's interesting because I asked about the Ukraine thing. I said, President Trump, you said you would solve this issue in a day. What's going on? And, he said, oh, I said that in jest, Eric. Everybody knew that was symbolic. I wasn't really saying I was going to get it done in a day. This has been going on for 3 years. I've only been here in 3 months. So, I sensed that there was some frustration on his part. And I also think, he pulled back on that claim that he'd be able to solve the war in 24 hours. Of course, he's not wrong that it's a very complicated, he's not wrong now that it's a very complicated issue and it's hard to solve. And he's got intractable players, in Vladimir Putin. But, I do think, this is a different moment for him than the last time I spoke with him, because he is right now facing all of these problems that you're talking about.
Senior political correspondent at Time, Eric Cortellessa, thank you. That exclusive interview in Time available now to read online. Eric, thanks so much.